It was 1942, and the United States was a nation at war. The streets of small towns and sprawling cities were quieter than ever. The men who once filled factories, offices, and farms were now thousands of miles away, engaged in battles across Europe and the Pacific. At home, a new kind of war effort was beginning, not on the front lines, but on assembly lines, in shipyards, and inside aircraft factories. Women, many of whom had never held a hammer or rivet gun, were stepping into roles once considered exclusively male. This was the moment Rosie the Riveter emerged, not just as an image, but as a living symbol of determination, skill, and patriotism. Rosie wasn't just one woman, she was hundreds of thousands of women who transformed the industrial landscape. Across the United States, cities hummed with the sound of production. In Detroit, Ford and General Motors plants were repurposed to build tanks, jeeps, and airplanes. In California, sprawling shipyards along the coast launched vessels at unprecedented speeds. The factories, once dominated by men, now thrived with women taking the wheel literally and figuratively of the nation's war effort. At the heart of this movement were women like Mary Johnson, a single mother who had never seen a factory floor before. When she arrived at a small aircraft plant in Long Beach, she was handed a welding torch and a stack of blueprints, and for the first time, her life changed forever. The roar of machines, the sparks flying as metal met heat, and the sense of purpose that filled the air were intoxicating. Mary, like so many others, learned quickly. Within weeks, she was building fuselages for fighter planes, her hands steady despite the noise and danger surrounding her. The transformation wasn't just about skill, it was about breaking stereotypes. Society had long told women that their place was in the home, yet these women were now driving forklifts, riveting ship hulls, and mastering machinery that had been considered too heavy or complex for them. And they were proving, day after day, that not only could they handle these tasks, but they could excel under pressure, meeting production quotas that rivaled, and often surpassed, those of men. The federal government recognized the need to encourage this workforce. Propaganda posters sprang up everywhere. "We can do it," declared a now iconic image of a determined woman with rolled up sleeves and a flexed arm. The poster wasn't just a call to action, it was a declaration that women were indispensable. It resonated with millions who were already working in factories, and inspired countless others to step forward, leaving behind traditional domestic roles to answer the country's urgent call. Training programs were established to equip women with specialized skills. Welding schools, machining courses, and blueprint reading classes became essential, as companies sought to maintain production speed and quality. Women like Mary trained new recruits, becoming mentors and symbols of resilience. Friendships formed across assembly lines, and a sense of camaraderie emerged. These women were not just workers, they were pioneers, reshaping social norms and redefining what it meant to contribute to the war effort. But the path was far from easy. Factory work was grueling, often dangerous, and physically demanding. The loud clanging of rivets, the heat of welding torches, and the constant risk of injury tested every ounce of courage and perseverance. Women worked long hours, sometimes 12 or 14 per day, often juggling childcare and domestic responsibilities alongside their industrial duties. Yet, despite exhaustion and societal skepticism, they pressed on. Each rivet hammered, each plane assembled, each ship launched was a victory, a tangible contribution to victory overseas. The impact of women in factories extended beyond production. Morale soared among the troops who knew their weapons, tanks, and planes were being built by skilled, committed hands back home. Families were reassured that their loved ones were supported by an entire generation of women taking responsibility for the nation's survival. And for the women themselves, the sense of empowerment was revolutionary. They were earning wages, gaining skills, and proving that capability was not defined by gender. By 1943, the presence of women in factories was no longer a temporary measure. Over 6 million women had entered the workforce, many for the first time in their lives. Their contributions were essential to sustaining production rates, and their competence forced companies and society to rethink deeply entrenched biases. They were the lifeblood of the home front war effort, the unsung heroes whose labor made military success possible. Rosie the Riveter became more than just a wartime icon, she became a symbol of possibility. Her image graced posters, magazines, and advertisements, capturing the imagination of a nation. But behind the poster were real women with names, faces, and stories of resilience. They were welding planes that would dominate the skies, riveting hulls that would ferry soldiers and supplies, and assembling machinery that would tip the scales of battle. Every day, their efforts directly influenced the outcome of the war, proving that courage and skill could come in many forms. The legacy of these women began to extend beyond the factory floor. As they gained experience, some moved into supervisory positions, training others, and managing production lines. Their success challenged assumptions about leadership, expertise, and work ethic. By the end of the war, the presence of women in industrial roles had permanently altered perceptions, setting the stage for post-war labor movements and the broader struggle for gender equality. For every Mary Johnson or Helen Carter, there were thousands of others whose names would never be known but whose contributions were equally vital. The roar of machinery, the smell of hot metal, and the sight of women standing shoulder to shoulder with men became a defining image of America's resilience during World War II. Rosie the Riveter was not a single individual but a collective force, a wave of determination that ensured victory not just on battlefields overseas, but within the very fabric of American society. By the war's end, the story of Rosie the Riveter had left an indelible mark. Women had proven that they could handle responsibilities, overcome danger, and perform with excellence under pressure. The poster may have been iconic, but the real story was far richer, a testament to the courage, skill, and enduring impact of millions of women whose work shaped history. Breaking barriers, life on the factory floor. The factory whistle blew at dawn, but for thousands of women entering the industrial workforce for the first time, the real battle began the moment they stepped through the doors. The air was thick with smoke, the roar of machines filled every corner, and sparks flew as welding torches cut through metal like streaks of lightning. For the women of World War II, this was the front line on the home front, a place where courage meant lifting, bending, and riveting under relentless pressure. Every shift was a test of endurance, skill, and sheer determination. Take Clara Thompson, for example, a young woman from Ohio. She had never handled a wrench in her life, yet by her first week in a plane assembly plant, she was expected to master precision rivets on fighter aircraft wings. The first attempts left her hands blistered and her nerves frayed. But quitting was never an option. Guided by older women who had learned through trial and error, Clara found rhythm in the chaos. With each rivet hammered, confidence replaced fear. Soon, she wasn't just keeping pace, she was teaching others, becoming a mentor on the floor. Danger was ever present. Machines moved with unforgiving speed. A single misstep could crush a finger or worse, and welding sparks could ignite flammable materials in an instant. Protective gear was minimal, and safety regulations were far from comprehensive. Yet these women persevered, understanding that their labor was directly tied to the survival of soldiers overseas. Each aircraft completed, each hull launched, was a victory in a war that demanded sacrifice on both foreign and domestic fronts. The workdays were grueling. Shifts often lasted 12 hours or more, with minimal breaks. For married women, childcare added another layer of complexity. Schools and community centers adapted by running temporary daycare programs, but the strain on these women's backs, hands, and spirits was immense. Still, camaraderie blossomed in the most unlikely of places. Lunch breaks became moments of shared laughter, exchange of tips, and quiet encouragement. Bonds forged in fire and sweat created a network of resilience that would carry them through the darkest hours of the war. Learning new skills was crucial. Welding, riveting, machining, and blueprint reading became second nature. Women who had previously been homemakers became experts in operating cranes, assembling engines, and crafting precision instruments for submarines, tanks, and airplanes. Their capacity to adapt was staggering. By the middle of the war, women were not only filling positions but often outperforming their male predecessors, shattering long-held assumptions about gender and physical ability. Despite their indispensable role, women faced social scrutiny. Some male colleagues were skeptical, even hostile. They doubted that women could maintain the pace, handle the stress, or execute the technical skills required. Yet, every completed project, every flawless assembly, was proof. Slowly, skepticism turned to respect. Men learned that the women on the line were not temporary placeholders, they were the backbone of production, capable of handling responsibilities that had once been considered impossible. Rosie the Riveter became more than a symbol, she became an idea woven into the very identity of these women. Posters plastered across towns shouted encouragement, but real empowerment came from the tangible sense of achievement. A ship leaving the dock, a plane rolling off the assembly line, these were accomplishments that resonated far beyond paychecks or propaganda. For many, it was the first time in their lives they felt the weight of independence and capability. Factories were not merely workplaces, they were classrooms, gyms, and arenas of transformation. Women mastered not only technical skills but leadership, problem-solving, and teamwork. Supervisors recognized the value of delegating responsibility to skilled female workers, breaking barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. By the end of the war, countless women had gained experience that positioned them for continued influence in business, technology, and engineering. The home front had become a proving ground, and women had emerged as masters of their craft. Innovation thrived in these factories. When production lines lagged or equipment malfunctioned, women improvised. They designed makeshift tools, reconfigured machinery, and solved complex engineering challenges on the fly. Their ingenuity was critical to meeting wartime deadlines. One notable story comes from a shipyard in San Francisco, where a group of women devised a pulley system that sped up rivet installation on battleships. The result: more ships launched, more supplies delivered, and more lives saved overseas. Yet, beyond machinery and deadlines, there was pride. Every woman understood that her labor mattered. The planes she helped build might carry a squadron to victory, the tanks she assembled could tip a battle in favor of Allied forces. Each task was a contribution, a piece of a larger puzzle that connected them to soldiers risking everything on foreign soil. Their work bridged continents and oceans, reminding everyone that heroism came in many forms, not just on the battlefield but in factories, shipyards, and assembly lines across the nation. By 1944, the presence of women in industrial roles had permanently altered the workforce landscape. They had proven competence, resilience, and creativity. Society could no longer dismiss them as temporary labor, they were indispensable. The experience reshaped expectations, expanded career possibilities, and sowed the seeds of post-war social change, including the fight for women's rights in employment, wages, and leadership roles. Rosie the Riveter, once an icon of wartime necessity, became an enduring symbol of empowerment. She represented millions of women who dared to step into unfamiliar territory, face danger head-on, and thrive in roles that demanded strength, skill, and courage. The factory floor had become a proving ground for an entire generation, and their legacy would ripple far beyond World War II. By the time peace returned, these women had accomplished more than production quotas, they had transformed society, leaving an indelible mark on history. They showed that when opportunity meets determination, the impossible becomes achievable. Rosie the Riveter was not just a wartime hero, she was a pioneer, a trailblazer, and a reminder that courage, skill, and perseverance are boundless, regardless of gender. Beyond the assembly line, women on the front lines of production. By 1943, the sound of hammering and welding had become a familiar rhythm across the United States. Factories buzzed with energy, shipyards shimmered with sparks, and the whir of machinery echoed through every hall. Yet for the women of World War II, stepping onto the production floor was only the beginning. They were no longer just filling vacancies left by men, they were innovating, leading, and reshaping the very meaning of work on the home front. Take the story of Eleanor Ellie Davis, a young machinist from Pennsylvania. Ellie arrived at a steel works plant with little experience but a fierce determination to succeed. Within weeks, she mastered the operation of a milling machine that had been considered too complex for anyone new to the trade. But she didn't stop there. Recognizing inefficiencies in the workflow, she suggested a reorganization of the assembly line that increased output by 20%. Her supervisors initially hesitated to accept advice from a woman, but results spoke louder than doubt. Ellie's innovation became a model adopted across other plants, proving that insight and expertise could come from anyone, regardless of gender. This pattern repeated itself across industries. Women were no longer merely following instructions, they were problem-solving in real time, creating safer work methods, and improving production techniques. At shipyards in Long Beach and San Francisco, women devised new ways to install rivets on hulls faster and more safely, directly impacting the pace of naval readiness. In airplane factories, female engineers suggested design tweaks that reduced assembly errors and improved efficiency. The ingenuity of these women became a critical factor in sustaining America's war production at an unprecedented scale. Leadership roles, too, were opening up. Women like Margaret Reynolds, who had begun as a line worker in a munitions factory, were promoted to supervisors and forewomen. Managing teams of dozens, sometimes hundreds, required more than technical skill, it demanded diplomacy, strategic thinking, and the ability to inspire others under pressure. For many women, these roles were entirely new experiences, challenging societal norms that had previously limited their career ambitions. Yet they excelled, proving that leadership was not a function of gender but of competence, vision, and dedication. The war also demanded flexibility. Factories could pivot from producing one type of equipment to another overnight. Women adapted, learning to operate entirely new machines, read unfamiliar blueprints, and meet shifting production goals. In the case of Liberty ships, for example, women helped complete massive vessels in record time, sometimes in under a month, a feat that would have been unimaginable without their tireless labor and ingenuity. Every day, their contributions ensured that soldiers overseas had the resources they needed to succeed. While the physical labor was exhausting, the emotional weight was equally heavy. Many women worked long hours, often 6 or 7 days a week, knowing that mistakes could have dire consequences for the men fighting abroad. There was pride in the work, certainly, but also a constant awareness of responsibility. Each bolt, each weld, each completed engine carried the weight of lives depending on its precision and reliability. The women of the home front understood that victory was not just about courage on the battlefield, it was about excellence and commitment in every task, no matter how unseen or undervalued it might seem. Innovation extended beyond machinery and workflow. Women also created informal support systems that kept morale high. Sewing circles transformed into networks for sharing tips on safety and efficiency. Cafeterias became venues for exchanging ideas and offering encouragement. Letters from soldiers boosted spirits, reminding workers that their efforts mattered in tangible, human ways. These networks forged a sense of community that sustained women through the long, grueling hours and helped many persevere despite exhaustion and physical strain. At the same time, women confronted lingering stereotypes. Some male colleagues questioned their abilities, and society at large was slow to recognize the significance of their contributions. Yet the results were undeniable. By 1944, women comprised nearly 40% of the industrial workforce, and their impact was measurable in production statistics, innovations implemented, and the sheer speed at which factories turned out planes, ships, and munitions. Their work was no longer ancillary, it was essential. Personal sacrifices were abundant. Many women put their education or pre-war careers on hold. Some postponed marriage or family planning. Others faced scrutiny from communities resistant to women in non-traditional roles. Yet their dedication never wavered. Each challenge met, each innovation implemented, each life-saving production milestone reached was a testament to their resilience, ingenuity, and unshakable sense of purpose. By the end of the war, the contributions of these women had permanently altered the landscape of American labor. They had demonstrated that capability, creativity, and leadership were not determined by gender. They had expanded opportunities, broken barriers, and created a precedent for future generations. Their work on the home front directly contributed to Allied victory, and their legacy endured far beyond the cessation of hostilities. Rosie the Riveter, while iconic, was only the face of a much larger story. Behind the posters were women like Ellie, Margaret, and countless others who reshaped industry, pioneered new methods, and proved that heroism could thrive anywhere from the battlefield to the factory floor. Their innovation, leadership, and perseverance ensured that America's war machinery functioned at full capacity, supporting soldiers abroad and safeguarding democracy at home. In every rivet hammered, every ship launched, and every engine assembled, these women left an indelible mark on history. They taught the world that courage was not limited to soldiers carrying guns, it could be found in women wielding wrenches, torches, and blueprints. They showed that commitment, intelligence, and ingenuity could transform a nation, proving that true heroism is as much about building as it is about fighting. By the time peace returned, the factories fell silent, but the impact of these women resonated for decades. They had proven their worth, expanded horizons, and laid the foundation for social change. Rosie the Riveter was no longer just a wartime symbol, she was a pioneer whose influence shaped the workforce, culture, and opportunities for generations to come. The lasting legacy, women of World War II and beyond. When the last whistle blew and the factories fell silent, the war was over, but the impact of the women who had powered America's industrial might was only beginning to be understood. The planes, tanks, and ships that had sped to the front lines were silent monuments to their tireless labor, but the true legacy was far deeper. It lay in shattered stereotypes, expanded opportunities, and a generation of women who had proven that courage and capability were not defined by gender. For millions, the transition back to peacetime was complex. Some women returned to traditional domestic roles, while others sought to continue careers they had built during the war. Take Helen Martinez, who had become a skilled welder in a Los Angeles shipyard. When the war ended, many of her colleagues were laid off or pushed out to make room for returning soldiers. But Helen refused to give up her craft. She enrolled in advanced engineering courses, leveraging the skills she had gained to secure a position designing commercial aircraft. Her journey was emblematic of countless women who turned wartime experience into lifelong careers, transforming industries that had once excluded them. Education became a critical pathway. Programs and scholarships that had previously been reserved for men opened to women, allowing them to pursue technical training, business studies, and professional development. The government and private institutions recognized that the investment in women's skills during the war had created a capable workforce ready to contribute to peacetime industries. The GI Bill, though primarily targeted at returning soldiers, indirectly inspired a cultural shift in education, encouraging women to seek knowledge and training at unprecedented levels. Cultural change lagged behind industrial progress, but the seeds planted during the war blossomed over time. Women's labor had proved that they could handle high-pressure, high-skill roles, and society slowly began to acknowledge this truth. The image of Rosie the Riveter evolved from wartime propaganda to a lasting symbol of empowerment, appearing in post-war literature, media, and social movements. She became an emblem of the idea that women could step into spaces traditionally reserved for men and excel. The political impact was subtle but significant. Women who had gained confidence and skills during the war began advocating for workplace rights, fair pay, and expanded career opportunities. Their experiences provided first-hand evidence that capability was not bound by gender, challenging discriminatory policies and inspiring legislative change over subsequent decades. These efforts laid the groundwork for the women's rights movements of the 1960s and 1970s, creating a lineage of empowerment that traced directly back to the home front battles of World War II. Even on a personal level, the war had transformed lives. Many women reported a newfound sense of independence, self-worth, and ambition. The experience of contributing to a global effort, learning advanced technical skills, and managing teams fostered confidence that persisted long after peace returned. Marriages, family dynamics, and social expectations evolved as women returned home not merely as wives or mothers but as skilled, capable individuals whose voices carried weight. Innovation remained a hallmark of their legacy. Many women continued to influence engineering, manufacturing, and science long after the war ended. The skills honed under pressure, problem solving, adaptability, leadership translated seamlessly into civilian industries. Women who had once riveted aircraft wings were now designing machinery, managing large-scale projects, and pioneering technological advancements. Their influence reshaped industries that had previously been dominated by men, proving that opportunity plus experience could redefine entire sectors. The legacy also rippled through education and mentorship. Women who had gained technical expertise became instructors, training the next generation of workers and engineers. Vocational schools, universities, and community programs benefited from their insight, bridging the gap between wartime necessity and peacetime growth. By sharing knowledge and experience, these women ensured that the lessons of the home front would continue to resonate, equipping young men and women alike with skills that were critical for national progress. Social perceptions, too, shifted gradually. Communities that had once questioned women's abilities now celebrated their achievements. Parades, public recognitions, and media coverage highlighted stories of ingenuity, bravery, and dedication. While full equality was far from realized, the undeniable competence of women during World War II forced society to rethink what was possible, setting a precedent for future generations to challenge barriers and pursue careers previously deemed unattainable. Perhaps most importantly, the legacy of these women was a testament to resilience and adaptability. They had entered unfamiliar roles, mastered them under intense pressure, and emerged not just competent but transformative. The impact was both immediate, helping win a world war, and enduring, influencing social norms, workforce structures, and cultural attitudes for decades to come. Their work proved that heroism was not limited to the battlefield. It could thrive in factories, shipyards, offices, and classrooms alike. By the 1950s, the imagery of Rosie the Riveter was firmly cemented in American consciousness. She symbolized more than a wartime effort. She represented the possibility that women could shape history through skill, determination, and courage. Museums, documentaries, and later films celebrated the contributions of these women, ensuring that their stories remained accessible to new generations. Schools began teaching about women's crucial roles during the war, highlighting how their efforts enabled victory and set the stage for social transformation. In the end, the women of World War II redefined what it meant to serve a nation. They proved that heroism came in many forms, on the battlefield, yes, but also in factories, shipyards, and offices where precision, skill, and courage determined the fate of soldiers and civilians alike. Their legacy is everywhere in empowered careers, educational opportunities, and a cultural understanding that potential knows no gender. Rosie the Riveter, the assembly line, the shipyards, the innovations, they were all chapters of a larger story about resilience, ambition, and transformation. These women left a mark not just on the machines they built, but on society itself. They showed that when determination meets opportunity, barriers crumble, and history itself can be rewritten. Their triumphs remain a powerful reminder that courage and skill come in many forms and that heroism is timeless.